and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy Podcast. My name is Jed, and today we are doing some philosophical midwifery. And we're in the first part, this one, philosophical midwifery, how it all began. So that's what we'll be doing today, reading philosophical midwifery. That's a quick recap of where we are so far. Pierre Grimes is living the life of someone called him in the chat, a spiritual Luffy. Luffy is a anime character from the very, very popular anime One Piece. And Luffy goes around the place on adventures and happens to bump into the greatest cook / kick fighter in the world, and the greatest swordsman in the world, and one of the best navigators in the world, and happens to run into the big heavy hitters in different fields, and he recruits them onto his ship. That's kind of an anime trope as well. The other example that we were using was Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump isn't real like Luffy in One Piece, but he's a fictional character who happens to run into key figures at key parts of history. Well, Pierre Grimes, as we're reading, seems to be doing that himself. He's run into some big names. Some of them we recognize from popular culture, like Alan Watts. A bunch of other people that you might recognize yourself as. Here we go, some names. Actually, let's recap in this. Well, L. Ron Hubbard, of course, famous for starting Scientology. Alan Watts, famous for being a great orator and one of the first Western intellectuals to go over to the East and study Zen Buddhism. One of the first, along with Pierre, of course. Joseph Campbell, who studied mythology from different cultures and wrote the book, many different books, including Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is standard reading for anybody who does screenwriting or that kind of thing, because he discovered there's a kind of hero's journey archetype that most mythologies seem to be following in some way. Anyway, so Pierre runs into these people in his lives. Oh, and he also helped us defeat that nasty Adolf Hitler. Oh, he is a big jerk, isn't he? Well, thankfully, Pierre was there to help us defeat him and his fascism. So let's jump into the text and keep reading. So far, just as a recap, in the channel, we are reading the Logos of Philosophy to discover the truth of the most important things in reality: beauty itself, justice itself, the nature of reality itself, the meaning of life. Where did we come from before we were born? What should we be doing here? Where do we go after we die? What is the best way of living? What's our purpose? All of these questions we're discovering in our reading of the Logos as reflected or shared through Socrates. And as we point out, only in the last decade have we had a text with the key terms translated properly. So we've dropped the ball in terms of our spiritual and intellectual golden age, our heritage, our birthright. We've dropped what Socrates left for us, but we have the ability to pick it up. That's what we're doing in our reading of the Logos of Socrates through the dialogues of Plato, like the Phaedo, and soon we'll be doing the Meno. We also started the Parmenides. These are fantastic dialogues. I encourage you to check them out on the YouTube channel. Also, we are investigating the Logos reflected down a dimension, its reflection into the intelligible systems of our physical world. In particular, music. Music is an intelligible system. It is understandable. And it is also knowable in a curious kind of way, in that we can experience the sound of music. We can recognize the beauty of music. even those who are untrained in music. But if the logos is in fact the paradigm of reality, the understanding itself, as well as the paradigm of understanding that will allow us to become rational, then it should reflect in all other systems. It wouldn't be much of a paradigm if it wasn't also in music. So in this channel, we also are studying the logos of music in a series called The Sense of Music. That's on the channel. And to create a nice even triad, which we love in philosophy, it's part of the patterns of the part of the patterns of the logos is its reflection into triads or groups of three, along with true philosophy, the study of music. We have ads on our chat. Let's get rid of that. We have what we're reading here, the study of the logos and the application of the logos to discover and remove our problems. So the claim is there is something in our reality that is understandable, or rather our reality is understandable because of something, and that something is called the logos, the understandability. Now, a lot of wonderful things follow. We have what we need to become rational. We have what we need to stop killing each other, or stop exploiting each other, or stop destroying each other and the planet. We can move from a barbaric, irrational human race into one that can be united in understanding. And that's really fantastic because as opposed to personal opinions or personal beliefs or personal traditions, understanding is open to all. It's not a matter of belief. You don't have to believe this or that charismatic figure in this or that kind of robe who drives this or that Rolex. No, Rolex, you don't drive a Rolex. A Rolls Royce, I meant to say. You don't have to believe in your favorite figure. You don't have to believe at all. You can understand. And understanding is beyond belief. So we have a way of uniting our whole species, but also we have a way of uniting our soul. This is what we are primarily focused on. Whether or not the rest of the human race wakes up to philosophy, awakens philosophy, mentioning the title of this channel, which is always fun. Whether or not the rest of the human race wakes up to it, we don't know. But we can. We can awaken the logos in our souls. We can move from false beliefs, prejudices, other kinds of negative, harmful, divisive beliefs within our soul that creates a kind of division or disharmony within our soul. We can move that towards reason and understanding, leaving behind the problems that are associated with false beliefs and the divisions and whatever the equivalent of war and exploitation and genocide would be for our souls. As above, so below. We can reflect this to humanity, waking up to the logos and becoming rational and acting in a just way, or our individual souls. That's what we are focused on, our souls. So, the word for that kind of rationality is, of course, the logos. And it's a paradigm or model of understanding. And if it's the model of all understanding, then it should reflect in everything. Most importantly for us, our quest to our highest goals or destiny, to know the self, and also reality and the meaning of life and our destiny or purpose. And the lower level, in the understandable system reflected in music, for example, or geometry. We're doing music at the moment. And what we're doing here, understanding our problems. And of course, if it's a paradigm, it should help us see what is in philosophy and what ain't. That's what we're focused on in philosophical midwifery. What ain't? what is not true about ourselves and reality that we are holding, usually without suspecting it, that's causing our problems. How do we discover these false definitions that demonstrate themselves in tragic ways, divide up into all other areas of our life, and prevent us from evolving, learning, becoming better, reaching our goals? That is philosophical midwifery. That's what we're doing here. So we kind of are killing two birds with one stone, to use a terrible analogy. That's an awful image. We are feeding two birds with one corn cob. We are learning how we can understand and remove our own individual problems, but also, as we go, we are learning the logos. We can discover things about the logos that we then can apply to our reading of Plato, Socrates. We can apply it to our learning of music. So we're learning about the logos while also learning this curious art of philosophical midwifery. That's called the new paradigm for understanding human problems. What will, hopefully sooner rather than later, it will eventually become the model for what we call psychotherapy today. But of course, that's one of the things that's come up in our reading, the fact that what it might actually not be psychotherapy, but philosophy. Psychotherapy might not be the healing art. It might be that the thing that psychotherapy is after is actually philosophy. Now, it might be that everything we're after is philosophy. That is an interesting question. And as we read, we look for questions like these. If we don't have a question, we can't be on a quest. We can't look to solve them. We can't seek for connections, new insights, new understanding. We're closed. We're kind of dead to that game. Having a question allows us to be in the game, really. Look for puzzles. Look for things you don't know. Hey, glad to be joining. Glad to have you here in the chat. Thank you to all those who are joining from the Discord channel. Anybody who's watching on YouTube or on Twitch, you're welcome to join the Discord. There should be a link below. We're having some fantastic conversations there. And as we were saying, look for questions, pick up questions, cultivate questions, carry questions with you in your reading, but also share them. Benefit yourself by putting them into words and benefit your friends by sharing them, and you can share them on Discord. So, one of our questions is, why the heck do we have our problems? And that's what we're in this book, discovering the logos, discovering the nature of our problems, and to be open to all of those lovely insights and growth and understanding, we look for questions that put us into a receptive, curious, wondering, reasoning state of mind that makes us receptive to the logos. Now, how did this all come about? Let's jump into the text and keep reading. Okay. So, as we're saying, Pierre Grimes is outlining his progress. He, in fighting Hitler, he realized that he was walking the same road that the Romans have walked. The Roman legions had used to pursue the invading barbarians to the north. And he recognized, oh my goodness, humanity as a culture is stuck in a repeating cycle of problems, of terrible things that are happening, and we ain't learning from our problems. So, and as above, so below, just as he realized he was playing a role in another act of European drama that no one understood or is going to learn from. He is after understanding how that is reflected in his own ignorance. As Aldous Huxley's perennial philosophy book, I went looking for some more books, joined St. John's College for a period of time, discovered Plato and Plotinus. Hooray, we love these guys. Got into some Spinoza, and then realized that after that, in his formal education, after these Platonic philosophers, they lost touch with the Hellenic tradition. No, that's on the thing. We lost our way. Since Christianity and other forms of modernism had turned away from contemplating this world as a reflection of an intelligible reality. We've been talking about the logos that we're after. Not only makes it able for us. Yeah, that kind of works. Makes it so that we can understand things in our world, understand ourselves. We don't have to be a slave to opinions, beliefs, traditions, ignorance, those kind of things. We can understand. And understanding is open to everyone, so we can all hold hands and sing and have a harmonious, wonderful world. But understanding is only part of intelligibility. The other part is knowability. So we also use understanding as a stepping stone to reach something called nous. We don't have a word for that in English. Loosely speaking, we could say knowledge, but that doesn't really work, because normally when we talk about knowledge, we referring to knowledge of things in the physical world. But intelligibility points to something called nous, which is knowing or direct apprehension of the realm of being. We might call it enlightenment. That's kind of the closest words we have. Or Juan Balboa often translates nous as direct intellectual insight. No, direct intelligible insight. But then the word intelligible is in the definition too. So that's what it means to be intelligible, not just understandable, but knowable. And as we were talking about in Discord earlier today, the aspects of that knowable reality in philosophy we call ideas. Aspects of that beholding of pure knowing by direct connection with, or unification with, or remembering the nature of mind itself. Now, just as Pierre here realized we lost touch with the Hellenic tradition of Plato and Plotinus, and Socrates, of course, so too have we lost touch with that definition of idea and replaced it with a modern idea, which is form. Plato and his forms, we are taught, which is baloney. And often that's translated as an abstract idea. Well, intelligibility and the intelligible reality that our physical world is a reflection of is more real than our physical world. So it's not an abstraction. So the ideas, beauty itself, justice itself, equality itself, are far more real than its reflection in our physical world. We might say that the ideas are the nouns, and our world only experiences these things as adjectives. We see a beautiful person, or we watch a just referee make a call for our basketball team that we like. So, lost our way, even in our teaching of these early people. So that's intelligibility, understandable and knowable. You can verify your understanding in your own direct experience. And that's very important as we are reading in the Phaedo together. While attending college, he ran into Mr. L. Ron Hubbard, friends with Tom Cruise, and points out that Dialectic was first outlined in a science fiction magazine. Enough said. but was not sufficiently rooted in any wisdom tradition to meet his needs, and then he wanted to find out where the Platonic and Neoplatonic tradition had gone. Was there anybody still in the game? He ran into our friend Joseph Campbell, hero of 1,000 Faces, who, worked closely with the Star Wars dude, George Lucas, helping him create his movies that follow this hero's journey. And of course, if we recognize that there is a hero's journey in our in mythology, in Harry Potter, in Luke Skywalker, in all of, in at least most fiction, we can ask the question, well, what is the archetype? What's the ideal? Just as in philosophy, we ask the question, hang on a second, if there are lots of examples of beauty, what's beauty itself? Well, maybe that ideal hero's journey that is reflected into our physical world is the very hero's journey we are all on together.
Wow.
Maybe. After all, the journey we're on isn't just to play it out as a Frodo figure or as a Luke Skywalker figure. We're on a journey to understand it. And which is better? The one who plays it out blindly, or the one who's seeking to understand the nature of the hero's journey itself? There's a question. Take that question with us. So, in chat, when she witnessed something naturally beautiful or just acts, that's an idea in action. Ooh, yes, nicely put. Now, we also are on the hunt for the dialectic too. So the dialectic, just to recap our notes, has... These are notes? We don't have a lot of notes yet. Okay, we have... These are notes. Right? So, now one thing we're on the hunt for in the our quest for the logos, our quest for understanding, is the dialectic. Let's zoom in a little bit. The dialectic, which has two terms: self and other. S and O. It has two sides. Which is what it is, side A, and what it is not, the side B. So for example, two categories, two parts. For example, we've been talking about what the word idea is, but it's also important to cover side B. What isn't it? It's not a concept. It's not an abstraction. And we can't really say we understand completely the word idea unless we have an understanding of both what it is and what it isn't. How is it misunderstood? So to philosophy, Pierre in our story recognized, Plato and the Hellenic tradition is onto something. But then the moderns dropped the ball, causing the playing out of history that he was a part of in fighting the Nazis on the same road that the Romans fought their barbarians, as though we aren't learning from our mistakes, as though we don't have the tools, the logos maybe, and the dialectic to reflect on our experiences and understand and learn. Curious. So, what it is and what it is not. Within there are, let's move this over here. There are 4 categories. I don't know how to spell that word. 4 categories. Number 1, self related to itself, or definition. What can you say about the subject itself? Definition. How would you define it just on its own? Number 2, how does it relate to another? This is our other term we've put in. So if we wanted to understand beauty, what can you say about beauty itself? What have you learned? In texts that reflect the logos, of course. So in our reading of Socrates, what have you learned about beauty? Also, you might discover a definition of beauty by exploring what it isn't in our reading of Midwifery. So we're kind of covering this side of things in our reading of Philosophical Midwifery. Or you might gain insights about beauty by studying the lower reflections in our reading of music, understanding the intelligibility of music. How does it function, or demonstration? So if we want to know beauty, how does beauty relate to something else you're interested in? How does beauty relate to justice? How does beauty relate to your soul? You get to pick. These are your dialectics. This is our activity. This is what in the Phaedo Socrates calls the true study and exercise of philosophy. So as we read, we look for terms and relationships that we can use to populate these categories. And we have our documents open, or our notepads open, and we take notes. And it's not supposed to be perfect. As you go through, the activity of going through this is the perfection of your understanding. So wherever you are, you're perfectly appropriate. No, that's not the right word. You're good enough. You're exactly where you need to be to start practicing dialectics. How does it function towards something? Number 3, in chat. What are we certain of, and what are we certain it's not? Certain is not. Knowing that our certainties can shift, and we're always connecting the dots as we go. Right. That's a key word, actually. Certainty will come up in our reading of this text too. Exactly. What is certainty? Does it prevent us from doing this? I'm certain I don't know enough about beauty to begin a dialectic on beauty. Well, actually, is that certainty preventing you from playing the game? Start. As you go through, you will be learning. And at the end, we'll see it comes back to the start and you can start again. So it unfolds, returns about upon itself, and spirals up. This is the dialectic. So those things that have been affected by the functioning or demonstration, so we can see the rolling on. So we have this term here, the newly defined self, becomes the next term. So this term rolls on to here, and this term rolls on to here. Let's go this way. So this thing that has been affected, how does it function to others? So we see the effect of beauty, or whatever our dialectic is on, division, dividing up into other things. So how does beauty relate to our soul could be our demonstration. And now that our soul has been affected by beauty, what do we do to our friends? What do we do to our life? How do we approach beautiful people now? How do we look for beauty in our studies? Do we seek beauty when we play sport? Do we have a new standard of excellence? This is division. others to others. And there's a fourth category, and there's only four. Isn't it wonderful that the structure of understanding is only four categories, reflected twice or doubled up? So again, either of these others roll on to our next category. How do those others then, after having gone through that process, after lived a dialectic, after having gone through those experiences, how does it synthesize or conclude? And then how does that relate back to the self at the beginning? Other back to self, back to the beginning. That's called synthesis. S-I-S. Synthesis slash analysis. So notice, it unfolds down. There's a kind of logic or rationality within the structure of rationality itself. That's cool. And then final term comes back, relates all the way back to the start. See? Maybe go around the other side. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So this term here comes all the way down, back to the start. And this motion, we have a word for it in Greek. It's called ousia. Now, we've been talking about intelligibility. That's the mind. The experience of being is the mind turning about upon itself to experience itself. That's the highest kind of ousia. This is ousia in understanding. Ousia. See how it's self-contained, but after having concluded, you've taken your divisions, you've found something significant, maybe causal, maybe that can unify all of the experiences, but you've seen something new. And you're taking that new conclusion and relating it back to the original definition. So now you're seeing the self in a new way. You're seeing the self you've defined at the beginning in a new way. You are learning. Isn't that cool? So you've not only unfolded in understanding, which is like the unfolding of reality itself, and then reverted back to the start, but you have understanding from having gone through that process. So it's kind of, by the way, if you have a new understanding of the topic, why, you have what you need to make a new definition. What does that mean? That means you've got what you need to do a new demonstration. In other words, you can do the dialectic again. So it unfolds and reverts, but has improved. So we have this kind of emotion that we can call growth or learning. So as we go, we want to try and apply this as much as we can. There's only 4 terms, and they're easy to remember because you can use 2 letters to cover all of it. Self, 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 other, 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 self. So we have this handy memorization or mnemonic device. Or we say DDAS even though it's DDDAS, we tend to say DDAS. It's easier to say. So we're going to look for those. So, for example, let's reflect back on what we said in chat. We are witnessing naturally beautiful or just acts as an idea in action. So when we see a beautiful or just act, which category would we put that in? What do you think? Two. Sure. It's a demonstration of beauty itself in our physical world. That's great. Fantastic. Oh, and now that you've recognized that, you can take that understanding and see how it might reflect in other things. Can you see something similar or like it in other areas? So this is what we want to look for. See if we can put this into our thinking as we go, as we read. So this will help us to read the text and understand. And by the way, if philosophical midwifery, which we're learning here, is an understandable pattern, it should have this reflected in it. Ooh. If I'm certain I'll never find the answer, I'm also certain I won't be able to connect the dots. Absolutely. Now, if our job is to connect the dots, and you have an unsuspected certainty that it's not possible or that you can't do it, you might be prevented from doing the very thing you're here to do. You might be prevented from this game of philosophy. So that's why we are doing this reading along with our reading of philosophy. Because we're human beings, we all have that unsuspected certainty. So we have to do our due diligence, have some integrity, and figure out how to uncover the things that would be blocking us in our reading of philosophy, in our mastering of understanding the logos and the dialectic, which is like ousia and is what unlocks our ousia. Just like in the text, Pierre recognized early in his life from the Hellenics that he studied at St. John's that this world, in the world of becoming, is a reflection of the intelligibility, just like, wow. The dialectic is in this world of becoming and is a reflection of the nature of the intelligible reality. We are doing ousia in understanding, which is a reflection of the ousia, or the essence, or nature of being itself. That should have some balloons. Yay, balloons. That's pretty cool. Right. The journey is necessary for making progress. The journey of uncertainty. Right. Often I hear in music, to be open to inspiration means you have to be comfortable with what's normally considered uncomfortable, which is not knowing. Part of an artist, I hear people say in music, is to be comfortable with the uncomfortability of uncertainty. So, well said in chat. All right, so we want to apply this as much as we can as we read. So he runs into Joseph Campbell, hero of 1,000 faces. Yes. During one of our talks about the state of philosophy as a spiritual quest, well, in our reading of the Phaedo, we might wonder if it's the spiritual quest. He turned to me and said quite seriously that the study of spiritual systems, including Plato, just wasn't happening anywhere at the universities. Shock. Which is very curious because in our we've had one or two readings of the music thing, and this very introduction was given to us by Zoka Kundal. The true understanding of music wasn't happening in the universities, which meant he needed to write this book. Curious. By the way, what did Socrates say? He said when he was young, he wanted to understand the cause of our physical world, and it just wasn't happening in universities. There was one guy, Anaxagoras, who said, oh, actually mind must be the cause. But he immediately dropped the ball and went back to the physical world, what we might call materialism or Aristotelianism, looking at the physical world for causes. Socrates says, I'm giving you my personal anecdote. You have to draw from my, in the Phaedo, from my explanation of a second search for causes beyond just physical explanations for things. You pull out from that what makes sense, what will help you in your journey. He says, you are Hercules, I'm Ionius, Hercules' assistant. I'm helping you. You're the hero of this quest, says Socrates in the Phaedo. Okay, so very curious. Both Socrates in our Phaedo, in our reading of philosophy, Pierre Grimes in our reading of philosophical midwifery, and Zoka Kundal in our reading of music start from the same place. They realized that our culture has missed the mark. The experts at our formal institutions aren't really understanding, aren't in the right game, and so they had to do something. So that's pretty cool. At least I think so. So, yes. So Campbell said, hey, check out Alan Watts. Some of us know Alan Watts from his talks on YouTube. In fact, some of us might have gotten into philosophy from discovering Alan Watts. He's quite a good orator. Very nice to listen to. So in San Francisco. So he went to San Francisco. So he tells the story in person of packing his family and his dog into a car. I'm not a car person, so I don't know this. I can't remember the name of the car. And then traveling down to San Francisco to study with Alan Watts and Tibetan philosophy with Lama Tada. So these are all heavy hitters. This is the Luffy-ness, or the anime where he finds the best swordsman happens to cross his path, and the best navigator crosses his path, and the best musician, because every pirate ship needs a good musician. So these heavy hitters in Tibetan philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Jiming Shin in Hindu philosophy, and also Haridas Chowdhury. And he had the good fortune of getting to know these men while studying with them. After receiving a fellowship from the academy, I was appointed lecturer in comparative philosophy. Hooray. That's where we're up to. I found much that enriched me at the academy. Friends, colleagues, books, ideas, and time for discussion over coffee. That's my highlighter. There we go. And it was during this time that I came to see that each of the wisdom traditions could be seen as accenting different aspects. Curious that we were just talking about the realm of the word idea, mistranslated as forms or abstractions or concepts, are aspects of being. So too did he recognize that different aspects of Platonic philosophy. Each of the wisdom traditions could be seen as accenting different aspects of Platonic philosophy so that its parts gain clarity. It seemed obvious that the works we were to study had lost touch with the Hellenic tradition. Since Both Christianity and the various forms of modernism had turned away from contemplating this world as a reflection of an intelligible reality. Such contemplation making Christianity and modernism turned away. Notice, what are we doing? Well, let's use our dialectic to help us reflect. We are turning upon ourselves. We're not turning away to other things. And by the way, in the Phaedo, Socrates talks about, if you're not interested in this, you're probably going to be turned away towards the love of riches or the love of fame, or some combination of those two things. Shock horror. We don't see that in the world, do we? People pursuing riches and desires, or fame and honor. Okay, contemplating this world as a reflection of an intelligible reality. Interesting. The world we're finding ourselves is negative dianoia. Well said. Well said. So you could do, challenge, open up whatever document you like, app you like. You've got something for side B. In your dialectic, in that page or document on, notice it's a hypothesis. If X is or isn't. So if dianoia exists and if it isn't. So you can throw what you just saw into side B on your dialectic on dianoia, which is pretty cool, which is kind of ousia itself, because you're dianoia-ing dianoia, which is very ousia-like. So our contemplation is making intelligible what formerly was only dimly perceived. That's curious. Just like, well, in music, you play a note, there are many overtones and harmonics dimly heard in that root note. But our musical scales unfold or make intelligible. That's our learning of, well, that's how I learn music anyway. So too, there's something dimly perceived about our reality that we're in that has led people to be watching this. If you're watching this, there must be something that you perceive worth knowing, worth investigating, significant, meaningful, in reality, in understanding, in beauty, in yourself. So what are we doing? We're making intelligible through contemplation. Whoops. Okay, let's use this button. Oh, goodness. What was only dimly perceived, when the nature and the dynamics terms and relationships, definition and demonstration maybe, in music, notes and intervals, but I'll stop referring to music for a while. But nature and dynamics of the self were the subject of discussion. We often made the writings of Carl Jung our companion. So what's he interested in? The self, big word. That drops a little quiet. I was delighted to discover that Jung had thought himself a philosopher instead of a psychotherapist. We just read the fact that Pierre was making this point to Regina Uliana, that actually what heals our psyche in psychotherapy is the art of philosophy. to that question he asked, which was, is psychotherapy philosophical, or is philosophy psychotherapeutic? Here we go. Psychotherapy is not only turn on the question of whether the psychological, or let's give it a different color for fun. Whether the psychological, or the philosophical element in these talks produced benefit. Which was it? The psychological or the philosophical? What is the true paradigm for benefiting people and their psyche? Oh, and I want to make clear to you, the reader, seeing as wants to make it clear, let's give it a different color. Do I need some more colors here? How about... All right, let's go another color. Let's go green. Make clear to you that while midwifery might appear like psychotherapy, it isn't. It may not appear like philosophy, it is. So that's a curious question we're taking with us. Why is it philosophy when it actually is what solves problems? Isn't that what psychotherapy is supposed to be? Okay. I was impressed with his idea of archetypes. Mr. Jung seemed in many respects similar to the Platonic ideas, capital I, that we've been talking about today. However, interesting, archetypes. We also mentioned, we had that question, is this the archetype or the ideal of the hero's journey that we're on now? If so, and you have the opportunity to make your own Star Wars series of films, you could be using yourself as the subject that is characterized in the drama of the characters in your fictional universe. Going one step beyond Joseph Campbell. However, he mentions that he had recourse to a dialectic. Oh, wow. Wow. We love, that's what we've been talking about. With his patience. Oh, actually, but boo. He offered no model. Good thing we were talking about the model today for our listeners or watchers of the podcast. So we're going one step beyond Jung. We are creating the model and sharing the model of the dialectic and doing it. He clearly recognized the profound value of the dialectic in his practice, but his writings gave little insight into its nature or the use of it, which we were doing today. As deeply as I delved into his writings and enjoyed them, I thought that the lack of detailed summaries or transcripts of his psychotherapy sessions weakened his contribution and made comparative studies of his dialectic and that of others impossible. What do we do often in this podcast? We do detailed summaries of what we've read. And in the Phaedo, Socrates says, yes, that's true learning, philomethesis, trusting the logos and repeating it, going back every morning with coffee. Now, coffee wasn't around back then, but if it were, I'm sure that's what Socrates would have said. Pierre said it. Earlier he mentions coffee. Where was it? Now this is a drinking game. Every time it's coffee is mentioned in the text, we have a drink of coffee. I'm sure he said it somewhere. There we go. Discussions over coffee. So have a sip of your coffee. It's what Socrates would have wanted. All right. He clearly recognized the value, but so we couldn't make comparative studies of the dialectic. Curious, because we said, hey, when we do a dialectic, do it again. Share it with your friends. In our Discord. Or in the chat. Or the comment section on YouTube. But his contributions were in his insights into comparative mythology, both East and West, and in religious symbolism. Right, okay, so similar problem that we might say our friend Joseph Campbell had, which is what? Comparative mythology, which is what? Comparing things in which, if you're doing comparative mythology, which category of the dialectic are you in? Well, maybe 4? Part of 4, because 4 has 2 parts. You could be comparing the divisions in our physical world, or maybe it's in this category, whether it's not, because we can ask the question, is mythology based on an insight of the ideal or not? Nevertheless, comparative, you have to analyze it. You have to refer it back to the definition or the thing itself, self to self. In other words, if you're just doing comparative mythology but not seeking the ideal, as we've been talking about today, you might not be in the game. Because who's to say that these 10 cultures that you studied, who's to say they had the logos? Who's to say they were doing the ideal? Now, of course, there's the symposium, which we could be reading at some stage soon, where... All right, that's a different puzzle for a different text. But we are interested in the idea or the ideal. So we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but that's a hypothesis. If we hear the word comparative mythology, and we already know from our reading previously that the moderns dropped the ball, they stopped looking at this world as a reflection of an intelligible world, we call the world of being, then maybe he's in this tradition. Of course he is. He was born at this time in this culture. Same too with our friend Joseph Campbell. Comparing mythologies, both Campbell and Jung, but maybe not then referring them back to the ideal and being like we do in our reading. Because we're doing the logos at the same time. The logos, the ideal, the paradigm. So, if you ever run into Joseph Campbell or Carl Jung in some alternate dimension, you have some interesting things to talk about over coffee. So his contributions were insights into comparative mythology, both East and West, and in religious symbolism. Interesting, which open new areas for many to explore. Interesting. So, is Mr. Grimes one of the many? As enriching as these academic studies were, is that a subtle dig? I found still another challenge when I was given the okay, so we know from our reading in philosophy, we don't know, but we look out for keywords. Socrates often compares what he is doing to the many. In fact, we have a quote from our reading of the Parmenides that we use often. From Zeno's Parmenides students talking to Socrates. Can you see that? The many are ignorant that without this discursive procession through all beings, bring it up. The dialectic, it is impossible for our intellect to hold on to the truth. The many don't value the dialectic. So this is from the Parmenides, Socrates' first introduction to philosophy. And Parmenides diagnosing Socrates' problem as he walks in the door. You are still young. You give heed to the opinions of human beings. So there's another reference to the many in our quotes. Empty talk. The many call this empty talk. Anyway, often the many are used in reference to distinguish side B, what it isn't. Because the many are interested in opinions. The many are not interested in philosophy, generally speaking. Not yet, anyway. Hopefully soon. Example with no logos. Justice is good, from the chat, because it helps people get along. Everyone should be fair to each other because it makes society work better. Yeah. What do you make of that? Because you say it's got no logos. Example with logos. Oh, you're doing a dialectic. Nice. Round of applause. Example with logos. Justice is a virtue that ensures harmony and fairness within society. It can be defined as the principle of giving each individual their due. To understand justice, we must analyze its components. The definition of fairness, number one. Number two, the application of justice in various contexts. Number three, the consequence of unjust actions. By demonstrating these principles through real-life examples and theoretical arguments, we gain from the nature of justice as a form. Is this a quote from somewhere? What are you using to create these categories? Do you have a model that you're looking to? Or where are you pulling this logos from? Is there a quote or something? Right, yes. So ChatGPT is not reading the logos. There aren't enough people. See, ChatGPT is an algorithm that sort of collects from the many. And we were just talking about how the many aren't in the game. So that because the many have not gone through this quest to discover the logos yet, you won't find it in ChatGPT. But use these categories. Could you do your own? What would be the four categories you'd have to fulfill in respect to justice to make sure that your understanding has logos or follows the structure of the logos? It's funny, in one regard, we can say, oh, philosophy is fantastic because everyone can play and it's free. Don't have to be rich. Like most things in our society, it's gate kept from most of us participating in because there are unjust billionaires sitting on mountains of gold like dragons, and you need to be rich and they can just patent. But the thing about philosophy, ain't no one able to patent the logos. It needs to include all scenarios. Right, well, could you say you'd have to give a definition of what justice is in relation to itself. So you'd have to get some key terms from somewhere. That's why we read Socrates. He talks about justice. He gives us key terms that we can put into this category. But then you'd have to say, well, hang on a second, how does justice function? By the way, does Socrates demonstrate someone with justice? How would justice apply to other scenarios? Or how does somebody who is affected by justice, how do they go ahead and relate to their friends? If Socrates is a demonstration of justice and he relates to someone, how do they then relate to others? How do we relate to each other now that we are benefiting from the justice of Socrates? Division. And then after all of us going through that, how do we take all of that and relate it back? What do we do in relation to justice? Do we investigate it? Do we seek to know it? Are we excited that justice is understandable and knowable? By the way, are there people in the world who don't think that justice is actually something that exists eternally, immortally in the realm of being? Yeah, that's the many. That's 99.99% of people at the moment. For them, in this category, what do they say justice is, number one? How would they function to something else that you can pick? You can pick the other. What do they say justice is? How does it demonstrate? By the way, what happens in the world if justice doesn't exist, but is just an opinion or something like that, is just a theory, is faith, is might makes right, whoever's got the biggest army, whatever it is that you put in there. And then finally, those people having been affected by all of this, what do they do in relation to justice? Do they seek it? Do they love it? Or maybe they think justice is terrible, or justice is revenge, or there is no justice in the world. This is the sort of fun you can have. So we're comparing what we get from Socrates and the Logos and this text we're reading to the many. Now, with that in mind, when we read Socrates drop this keyword, so Jung was using the dialectic, but he didn't seem to understand it or document it. So we couldn't compare what he's doing and benefit. But he was interested in comparative mythology and religious symbolism. Yeah, that's good for the many. Now, considering we know the many usually go in category B, we can pick up what he's saying. Maybe he doesn't think very highly of this kind of work that doesn't seek the truth. Good for the many. Right? Lots of people like to talk about Carl Jung. If you were to try and have a conversation about, I don't know, healing or archetypes, are you more likely to find someone who knows about and interested in Carl Jung or Socrates? So that sticks out for us. Oh, and also academic studies. As enriching as these academic studies, he's already mentioned that the academic studies has fallen short, dropped the ball. So this is why we take what we read and we carry it with us, just like each of these terms we carry with us into the next one. We take what we have defined and we carry that definition into demonstration. So too, we carry our reading and our conclusions. Oh, yeah, comparative mythology like Joseph Smith ain't much. So if Carl Jung is doing it, we carry that with us so we can, I get what he's doing. I see your problem. Likewise, our reflection of the many with our understanding of side B of the dialectic. Likewise, he's already... Where's my pen? Here it is. He's already pointed out that the academics dropped the ball. So when he says, oh yeah, these are very enriching academic studies, we know he's being not polite, he's being tactful. If you're paying attention, that will sound like it's a compliment. Oh yeah, enriching. Oh yeah, Jung's really enriching. That's good. I love Jung. By the way, if you ever tried pointing out this to someone who loves Jung, or pointing out that to someone who loves Joseph Campbell, they get quite mad. They don't like you insulting the guy that they love. There might be reasons for that we learn in our reading. Nevertheless, it might be more tactful or artful to speak in this way, where if you're paying attention, you'll get it. Yeah, we've been paying attention. We've already seen what he says about academic studies missing the mark. But if you're not paying attention because you don't care about the truth, you just care about your love of Carl Jung, because that's where you got your degree, and your degree earns you money or whatever it is that made you love the dude, then, oh yeah, it's a compliment. You're enriching. Oh yeah, he does enrich academic studies. I love academic studies. That's what I'm all about. So this is a compliment. But if you're in the game, if you're reading, if you're trying to seek truth, not hold on to your opinions, then you'll realize this isn't a compliment at all. So fun puzzles that open up to us if we read with the integrity and the desire to gain the truth and not be bound to the problems or the blocks of our ignorance. In chat, consider a scenario where a friend... Is this ChatGPT, by the way? I don't want to read ChatGPT because, and the reason is, if I give feedback or direction, ChatGPT isn't going to learn from me. But to you can ChatGPT isn't really artificial intelligence. It's not intelligence. It's an algorithm, but you are. Oh, it's not. Good. Consider a scenario where a friend lends you weapons with the understanding you'll return them when requested. This sounds like ChatGPT because this is the example from the Republic. However, if the friend asks for weapons when they are not in their best judgment, you may decide not to return them immediately. This situation illustrates how concepts of bothering... Yeah, this sounds like ChatGPT. What are you going on about, not ChatGPT? I did read a bit of it. Oh, this was your reflection on your reading of the Republic. Well done. Returning borrowed items involves various considerations, including the timing and the friend's judgment, which are part of division. Ah, well done. Yes, very nice. Yes. Good, yes. Right, so someone who had a false idea of justice, that it's simply paying your dues, in this division or particular scenario, might say, well, yeah, here it is. Whereas someone with an understanding of the ideal or true justice might have a greater awareness of how to adapt to the specific situation, which would be division. Nice. Definition provides a core concept. Demonstration shows its application. Yes, or functioning. Yes. Division explores the different aspects, and analysis integrates these elements. Are you sure that's not ChatGPT? That summary sounds like ChatGPT. Either that or you're just a really fast learner. Oh, okay, you asked ChatGPT to refine what you said. Don't ask ChatGPT to refine it. Oh, yeah, I don't know. If your English is terrible, that might be a boundary. I'm not sure. But here's the thing. You are, in sharing your words, coming up with a definition. But we said, hey, definition isn't good enough. That's not the game. Otherwise, we could go to these academic studies and get Jung's definition and memorize it and spew it up on an exam and get a good grade and start our own psychotherapeutic practice, just regurgitating whatever we learned about Jung. We are not evolving spiritually to higher functioning in our understanding, and the understanding is a stepping stone to different states of consciousness or enlightenment experiences. We're missing the whole point of learning. Learning isn't to become famous with a degree by repeating Jung. It's not about becoming rich because we can charge money for our psychotherapeutic practice. We're in this game because we want wisdom or enlightenment, direct apprehension. So, definition is great, but try and put it in your own words, because that's you demonstrating what you're defining. Doesn't matter if your English is terrible, you'll get better at it by demonstrating it many times, division. And by the way, if you are going to trust the logos and trust the self, is that part of justice? Trusting the logos and trusting the self? By the way, if that's part of your definition of justice, then you trusting your logos and trusting the self, even though you might not be perfect like Socrates. I mean, I wouldn't say he's perfect, but you know what I mean. Then you would not only be defining justice, you would be representing it yourself. You would be demonstrating the very thing you're defining, which would itself be just. So you're not going to get any bad grades if your English stinks, but you might be getting something even better than grades if you try it out yourself. This is what I wrote to ChatGPT. So definition, what we see as the presenting to us as a fact. Nice. Demonstrating is when we see our stimulate that definition is execution. Great. See, this is good. This is important because while ChatGPT might clear up the language or give you a different term that would, give you a good mark on a text, pretty much that's what ChatGPT is for. Doing stupid, brainless crap that we have to do at school so we can be a cog in the capitalist fascist system of mindless regurgitation of opinions. That's what ChatGPT is good for. Busy work. But what's interesting and what we're doing is the specific words we choose are indicative of where we are. As we read philosophical midwifery, we'll recognize, hey, when we're doing it, we never give the other person words. The words always have to come up from themselves. So as the midwife or the one with the art helping another person, we always stick to the words they use. We ask them questions to draw out their logos, their language, their keywords, but then we use that only. Whereas Jung, as we're reading, doesn't do that. He leans on comparative mythology, religious symbology. He doesn't use the words from the person. He relates it to these cultural myths, cultural language. So he misses the ball completely. So the words that you specifically use is the whole point. It's the whole game. So there's no such thing as right or wrong words. I mean, there's just playing the game or not playing the game. Playing in the game is giving your own words. And I've watched hundreds or thousands of midwife talks, and it can take a lot of time. Someone, I can't think of a word that means that. We take all the time that we need. Sometimes the midwife will ask questions like he will give the opposites. Is it this thing? Obviously not, it's that thing, in order to maybe get the juices flowing, but the words always have to come from you. So your second answer was way more fruitful. There's gold in that, because you have to look out for what keywords keep coming up when I'm in my high state and when I'm blocked. In the high state, that will be discovering your self-logos. When you're blocked, it will be information to help you uncover the blocks that you are here to discover. Because as human beings, we're on both quests to uncover the self-logos, but also to uncover the problem that we get from childhood. That's midwifery. It's always better to use your own words. In this game, in academic traditions, yeah, I don't know, use ChatGPT because, but that's why when we read this text and Pierre is saying, oh yeah, good for the many to explore in academic studies, we know, boo. And if Joe Biden was there, he would say,
come on, man.
And he would say,
flippity-jibbity nonsense.
Joe Biden would say it's flippity-jibbity nonsense for what we're doing. So that's interesting. The logos is within us. And hey, how different is that from the many? Ever been out with your friends or out at the pub and you use your own special word, but it's not the cool word that everybody else says? Everybody is saying it's skibbity, but you use a different word. They might all make fun of you for not conforming to the traditions or the culture. The exact opposite of what we're doing. We encourage your own self-logos. We share it. We nurture it. In midwifery, formally, we try not to influence your own self-logos. Execution. See, I liked execution even better than application. Execution is really nice. Division, we start to see different scenarios. Yes. Our final conclusion. See, conclusion is key as well. Absolutely. Conclusion is a key word that's very, fits very well to synthesis and analysis. So if I were to grade on a paper, the second response gets better marks than ChatGPT. Now, we don't care about grades on a paper, so we would throw that grade in the bin, because the whole point is to discover the self-logos, giving birth to the words within you, just like a midwife gives birth to babies. That's where the word comes from. Right. See, now take note of that. Now reading, I could have written much better. I was just lazy. Now, that's either going to be true or false. If it's true and you realized it was a pattern that prevented you from participating in excellence or justice or logos, then take a note of it. Just like we have our notepads open or our favorite document apps open for all our dialectics, have another one open for all of the key words that come up, the logos that come up when we're blocked from excellence, because that's going to be gold for us. This is like sometimes in video games, the hero's journey, they mine for minerals that they can use to craft a great weapon. These are the gold minerals that you use. And you might notice, hey, this being lazy is a certain keyword definition that demonstrates it in a way that prevents my excellence. And I can notice other times in my life when I could have been great, but I was lazy. This is the start of doing the dialectic on certain keywords that will eventually free you from that block, because it's there for a reason. Because why? Because this physical world that we're playing out, just like we play out the reasoning of the dialectic, is a reflection of the whole thing as a whole, as a oneness. This is the intelligible reality. We are playing it out in time. So we look for these patterns, keywords. And these keywords are gifts for us to uncover what is false or the cause of the laziness. That's midwifery. Or it may be that you're not lazy at all. It's a belief you're carrying about yourself that's not true. But you might not recognize it as a belief. You might think it's real. That's a belief. A belief is something you think is real. But it might become a self-fulfilling prophecy because you believe it's real and you don't recognize who you learnt it from. Maybe yourself isn't lazy at all. Someone treated you in an unjust way and you walked away with a conclusion without logos, without asking questions, without having a dialogue, without putting it into words. An unsuspected false belief about yourself, I must just be bad and lazy. And that false belief may be a false in the category of what it isn't. Should move these aside. It may be a false belief about yourself, the negative side of the dialectic. Need more space. Sorry, just making some space over here. So, an unsuspecting false definition, or where's what color we're using this one? Hey, I'm lazy might be a false definition which demonstrates itself in a certain way. By the way, did it take effort? Did it take extra effort to go through a process of clearing up your words through ChatGPT? It would have, or would it have taken less effort to just speak spontaneously? So it's taking more energy from yourself, from your soul, from your psyche. So we can call that a psychic parasite in a certain way, for you to do these extra steps that would only be needed if you thought you weren't good enough on your own. By the way, if you are putting in extra effort, does that fit the definition of lazy? Right, less energy. If it doesn't, it might be in this category. It demonstrates yourself as putting more energy, but then in the various way that you apply more energy, that's not even needed. Alan Watts, we mentioned before, has an expression. If you rush to catch a train, you might end up tripping over your own shoelaces. You don't need the extra effort. But if you put that extra effort in, you might get in your own way. That's an expression Alan Watts likes to use. But after tripping yourself up by putting in that extra energy, the way that you conclude, to use your words, is, oh, I must, this is you, your speech bubble, I must just be lazy. Is that a valid conclusion, or is it what unfolds in the negative side? By the way, does that conclusion come back to the start and confirm your definition that began the whole process? You wouldn't have done this if you didn't first believe you were lazy. Right? So, just like this synthesis and just like this side here, it reverts back to the self, except the difference is, in this side, you come back with a new understanding of the definition, which gives us this diagram here. You turn, you unfold, there's the unfolding, there's the returning, but you end up higher. And you spiral up. Whereas this one, if you end up with a false conclusion, a false category 4, that confirms the definition you had, would that be a spiraling up? What would you call that kind of activity? What's your word? What comes up for you? Is it a spiraling up? An evolving? Or if you're confirming what you already believe, what's that called? Got kind of lost. Well, I'm sorry. So let's break it down more slowly. Hypothetically, if, we don't know, but it's an if. If it's not true, well, let's say you thought I'm lazy, but you actually, so this is a definition you have about yourself. But actually, in your functioning, in your demonstration, would you agree that you put in more effort to go out of your way and tidy up your language through ChatGPT? Yes or no? Because you're afraid to say something wrong. Interesting. So you've discovered a deeper cause. By the way, did that play out in an activity or a division after being afraid to not say something wrong? You went ahead and did that activity, and did you come to, when asked about it, did you come to a conclusion from your activity that you were lazy like this? Did you say that? Yes or no? And by the way, was it something that you already believed about yourself? So in other words, after going through that activity, you ended up with a conclusion that you already believed. Even though, reflecting on it, you're actually good enough. And you actually weren't lazy, you went to extra effort. So your conclusion when you said you're lazy was something you already believed. Your definition of yourself, you are confirming. Is that a name? Is there a name for going through a series of activity only to end up confirming what you already thought? Now, when I ask that question, I'm looking for your word. There's no right or wrong. Do you have a word that would mean that? Confirming what you already thought to begin with? There's no right or wrong. This is what comes up for you. And the next question I would ask is, certain. Yes, creating certain of being lazy until you believe it and it becomes lazy for real. Yes. Only it wasn't real. You actually put in more effort. But you believe it's real. You make sense of your activities in a way that confirms the false belief. Confirming what you already were certain of. Isn't that interesting? Now, when we looked at side A, we saw that when we define something, like we're reading Socrates and we get some key terms about beauty, but then we also want to see how it functions, how it demonstrates, maybe how beauty affects justice or how beauty affects our soul. And then we see how having been affected by beauty, our souls relate to other people, others to others. And then from all of that activity that we go through, we take these divisions and we come to a new conclusion that we take back to the start to see what we started with in a new way. So we've learned. In other words, we have unfolded in activity, come back to the start, but when we come back to the start, we're not back to exactly where we started from because we've learned something new. So we come back up here, right? But we've seen our definition in a new light, which means we can start it again. We've got a greater understanding to start another unfolding in a dialectic and then returning to see it again. Every time we go through it, we're at a higher level. See how it goes up and up and up because we're discovering something new that we didn't see before. To use the text, what are we doing? We are making intelligible the nature and dynamics that was only dimly perceived. We only dimly perceived it, but after having gone through it, we bring into light, we make intelligible, we see it in a new way. So that spiraling upwards. Right, so you're applying it to a problem. Whereas over here, there's no spiraling upwards. When we come back to the conclusion that I'm lazy or that I'm not good enough or whatever it is, every human being has maybe one, but many different kinds or many different aspects. We end up confirming what we already believe. We haven't gone up a level, so we don't spiral up. We stay going around and around in a circle in a self-fulfilling prophecy, confirming what we already believed. What would you call that? Stuck in a loop. Oh, sorry, what would you call it? Very different from this one, right? A negative void. You're stuck in a negative void. Isn't that curious? So this side is like that side, or rather, our problems are very much like what we do in philosophy when we learn about beauty and stuff, only a diminished version, a distorted reflection. There is a kind of unfolding, there is a kind of returning, but you're stuck in a loop. You're stuck in this energy draining. You never learn something new. You become more entrenched in your false beliefs that limit you. You're in a negative void. That's what we want to get out of in philosophy, in midwifery. That's what we're doing here. Isn't this cool? And it can all be understood with just this one simple model. Our problems, so we often say there's a ladder of logos that we climb in philosophy, but it casts a shadow. Notice our problems, yes, we're learning how to reflect on it and how to encourage others to reflect on it. Notice our problems are not no ladder. It's that we have this false ladder that we're stuck on. Notice this ladder doesn't go up. It's stuck wherever it was. It's stuck on the ground. So we say this is the ladder of the logos we climb in philosophy by reading the logos from Socrates. And this is the problems that come up that we have to also address. So you're not really doing philosophy unless you're also doing midwifery. And by the way, in order to surface the deeper blocks, you better be pursuing a meaningful goal. And the really deep-seated blocks you won't surface unless you're going for the highest goal. In other words, philosophy. So you're not really doing midwifery either unless you're also doing philosophy. See how they fit together? Isn't that cool? Just as side A and side B fit together in the dialectic. They both come together. You can't do one. You don't have complete understanding unless you also talk about what beauty isn't. Right. Sometimes we climb the ladder, but don't realize it. Yes. And then when we do, we fall to the ground again with no idea what just happened. Exactly. We are understanding what happens. Everyone does that. As you reach a higher level of success or a higher goal or a higher level of functioning, so too comes a higher or a different level. Wouldn't be higher because it's on the ground, it's a shadow of a ladder. A different rung of your problem. You're getting closer to the ideal or the essence of your problem, just as in philosophy we're going higher and higher to the essence of being, or above that, the self. You're going to be doing both, which is cool. So we are reading Pierre going through the process of doing both. He is discovering that there is something true in Plato and Socrates and Plotinus and maybe even Spinoza. But also he is encountering all of the things that aren't true. The academic traditions, European and Christian, modern and Christian philosophy, modern and Christian thought that left the Hellenics. What's his name? Not Ron Burgundy. What's his name? Ron Hubbard. Joseph Campbell. What's his name? The other guy. Comparative philosophy guy. What's his name? Jung. He's encountering both. He is living a dialectic. Wow. Just as we are. Fun. All right. So, as enriching as these academic studies were, I found still another challenge when I was given an opportunity to accept a position at the Single Men's Rehabilitation Center in Redwood City, California, where I could explore the human condition most directly. There I conducted group discussions and counseled some of the members who were alcoholics. Actually, rather than conduct discussions, I was a learner. Interesting. He's learning. I was a learner. Why is my thing not going? This button? No. Highlighting now. Oh goodness. This one? I was a learner wanting to understand how it was that they understand what? How it was that they arrived where they were. Interesting. I learned a great deal about cycles of behavior by talking to chronic alcoholics, and I began to formulate a way of exploring problems of behavior. These men went through cycles that had reoccurring features, and as I learned more about these cycles and how they interrelated, I was able to use what I saw as a departure point for group discussions. Interesting. What's he doing? He is curious. He's opening. He's learning. He isn't coming in with certainty. He's already held conclusions. Oh, you're an alcoholic. You are this or that. Looking for cycles of behavior, wanting to explore the patterns, seeing the cycles, looking for reoccurring features. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier. How they interrelated. And he uses this as a starting point for group discussions. Some of the participants were able to benefit from this understanding and make significant changes in their lives. So we have a keyword here, benefit. Now, it was as if each person I talked with brought his life to me as a koan, something to ponder, to puzzle over, to wonder at and solve. We have been talking about the significance of giving birth to questions, our questions from ourselves, both our insights and our blocks, our self logos, our certain words that reflect our highest understanding and vision, and our blocks, the kinds of words we use to shut ourselves down, diminish ourselves in some way. And what did we do? We said, hey, nobody's getting a grade over here. We are just going to ponder them together, puzzle over them, wonder about them. Look at this. These are all states of mind. Much higher than the certainty we talked about that keeps us trapped in a energy-sapping, repeating, a negative void, self-confirming prophecies, fate. You could put all of those dynamics into a word fate. I know what's going to happen. I'm just this. I'm just that. This is different. We're pondering, we're puzzling, wondering. We could even say it's the opposite of that certainty state of mind. Now, what is koan? Koan is a special word that means a kind of puzzle or a spiritual puzzle, often given by a guru to someone who seeks enlightenment. It's a kind of question that can't be solved rationally. So, hopefully they'll get stuck on it. Hopefully there's enough mystique in the tradition or appreciation or devotion towards the guru that they really hold this question and they focus on it. And because it can't be answered rationally, they can stay in that state of wondering and puzzling over it. Now, I tend to call these koans bubblegum, because they're kind of tricks. The interest you have in a koan given to you is based on you thinking the guru is wise, or you thinking this tradition is ancient and mystical and spiritual, or some other reason. In other words, you have to apply other extrinsic or external curiosity and interest in it to hold it as a question. And as some of those koans are not rational, like what is the sound of one hand clapping? There is no rational answer on purpose, so you can stay wondering as you sit on the mat and contemplate your koan. Then it's like chewing gum. You just end up chewing and there's no real answer. It's not actual real food. Now, I call it that because in this game, we have the real thing. You don't have to look up to anyone or be in a tradition or be accepted into a Zen monastery. And there's lots of stories about how if you go to a Zen monastery, they'll say, there's no room for you here and get out of here. And you have to sit at the gate and wait. And they'll come back the next day and they say, I told you, we have no room for students and you're not good enough. Get out of here. And then you sit there and wait and they come back the next day. Okay, not only are you not good enough, but you need to train harder. You're not the right race or something. They'll try and push you away and you've got to sit there for days and days and days, and sometimes they come out with some rice and they feed you until eventually you've shown your devotion and then they let you in. These kinds of ways of making sure that you are bringing all this extra wonder and curiosity and appreciation for the tradition. You don't have to do that here. You don't have to jump through these hoops. You don't have to be mystified by some ancient guru in his robes or his shaved head or whatever he does. Why? Because you're naturally already interested in your own problems. You are curious about why the heck do I get stuck in these situations? Also, you're naturally curious about reaching your highest goals because they're your goals. You don't have to be in any group, jump through any hoops, trust some funny guy in a dress or a funny hat. You don't have to have belief or faith. They are yours. You give birth to your own natural questions. Also, they are solvable. There are real, understandable reasons for why we have the problems we have, and at a higher level, why we were born into this family and time period and culture to get this specific problem in order to benefit our soul in a certain way. In other words, our problems are understandable. You don't end up chewing gum forever. You actually get the nourishment. It's actually solvable. So there's nothing artificial about these questions. What questions? The questions about your problem. So you could say it's the true koan, or a koan. Yeah, I like saying it's the true koan. We're naturally interested in our own problems. And in philosophy, we're naturally interested in our mind, the highest reach of the mind, and we're naturally interested in ourselves. So what's the highest term in philosophy? The self. Know thyself. There's nothing artificial about it. There's nothing chewing gum. Yes. There's nothing bubblegum or chewing gum about it. Ponder, but you have to ponder. You're naturally curious. So that's what a koan is. It's kind of the, let's go back into the text. Earlier he said, by the way, these Eastern wisdom traditions could be seen as accenting a different aspect of what is in its ideal in Platonic philosophy. So we could say, hey, koan is a wisdom tradition from various like Buddhism and Zen and stuff, Eastern traditions, that accents the aspects. What aspects? Holding a question, staying in that state of mind of curiosity and wondering, being focused on it. But it, as it says in the text, it's only aspects. The whole thing, the real thing, is Platonic philosophy, the thing we dropped. But we're picking up in this channel. So some aspects are in a koan. The other aspects, what aspects? The solvability of knowing the self, the solvability of our problems, the natural interest, curiosity to solve our problems that bring us into this game, both midwifery and philosophy, and also music or geometry, whatever else you discover the logos in. So we can see in koans aspects of what we are discovering in the real, in the true. And in the Phaedo, we have a fantastic quote that is lots of fun because it could fit on a bumper sticker of your car. Socrates saying, hey, by the way, there are many spiritual traditions and they walk around with staffs and they have funny headdresses sometimes and they call themselves gurus, give koans. His expression was, where is it? Many are the staff bearers walking around with a spiritual staff, but few are the actual mystics. We were called gurus. Our translator says inspired mystics. These are, according to my opinion, none other than those who have practiced philosophy correctly. So, that's what we're doing here. So good for us. And that's what a koan is. I took the idea of a rational, this one, of a rational approach to the study of human problems. No, and so the idea of a rational approach to the study of human problems slowly took shape. And being a philosopher, I called it both the dialectic and philosophical midwifery. So what we are discovering, we can see the dialectic can be applied to both, but philosophical midwifery when we talk about our problems specifically. I had not thought that this approach would be regarded as psychotherapy, but rather as a mode of psychotherapy. By focusing on the word mode, I thought it would be clear that I considered philosophical midwifery to be something like psychotherapy, but not a psychotherapy. How to distinguish. This actually is making me read better and in a more enjoyable way. Thank you for sharing. Like we're saying, sharing our problems, sharing our insights, but also sharing our successes. Hooray! That's important too. You got to be doing both to be in this game. Why? Because philosophy is not a one-person game. Just like Frodo doesn't go on a quest to destroy the One Ring on his own. He has a group of adventurers. Gandalf says,
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
right? And so these are just divisions of the hero's journey into lower expressions. It's just like video games. You have a party of people and you share your talents, you share your problems, but you share your high states. So thank you for sharing your successes or your high states. You are reading better and in a more enjoyable way. Hooray. Clap. Wow. How to distinguish. Oh, and we could also gain an extra thing from that. Turn it into a question. Turn it into a koan. Is there a puzzle? Can we find a puzzle in that? We don't just have to puzzle about our problems. Why are you reading better? Why is it more enjoyable? Or why now? I don't know. See what questions come up for you. So I had the tools I did not have. Right. So those questions were suggestions and they didn't stick. I mean, it brought forth more insight. Having tools is a good way of understanding it. But keep pushing questions until you can find a koan. What's a koan? Something for you to puzzle and ponder and wonder at and eventually solve, but hold on to for a while. What can you wonder about? So that's a fun way of going about it, because that's having a question is being on a quest.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So how to distinguish this philosophical midwifery from psychotherapy was, and how to distinguish, let's copy that. From psychotherapy was, so philosophical midwifery from psychotherapy was an issue that I enjoyed, speaking of reflecting on puzzles, that I enjoyed reflecting on. I used to wonder, so enjoyed, reflecting, wonder, whether I was a Platonic philosopher disguised as a psychotherapist, or a psychotherapist doing the most fundamental kind of philosophy. Because I start to see a pattern when I read, this makes us automatically grasp certain things. Is there a question about patterns in reading? Now, one technique that we do in philosophy and midwifery, well, in the dialectic, is to discover puzzles we can reflect on. What's the cause of the divisions? Some sort of functioning? What's the cause of the functioning? Something itself? What's the cause of that? Go even higher. So wondering about causes is a tool or a technique to give birth to a new higher question to keep your good insight rolling up, reflecting on causes. So from your insight or good experience, if you create a koan or a natural koan or a natural question, you can build on it give birth to higher questions. And one technique is to look for causes. So can you apply causes to your reflection, your latest one? Often we apply it to the last thing we have. It's often the greatest where we are so far. I see a pattern when I'm reading. Can you use this technique of using the word cause applied to patterns in reading to give birth to a question that you are naturally curious about yourself? Looking for the 4 gems. What are the 4 gems? These 4? What? My recent one. So patterns. Use this pattern thing that you're discovering and turn it into a question that can keep you wondering and puzzling. Speaking of puzzling and wondering, I wondered which discipline was more important for the exploration of man. So was he a psychotherapist, doing the most fundamental kind of philosophy, or a philosopher disguised as a psychotherapist? Which was the more important for the exploration of man? So, right, those are the 4 gems. Nicely said. By the way, that's called mythology. Taking your understanding of the Logos as you learn and using metaphors and stories to represent it, you're making a myth. So if you're into story writing or songwriting or filmmaking or video game making, those could be the 4 gems that the hero of your story is on a search for. Now, they're actually gems in the myth, but we know that they represent these 4 aspects. So that's a way of remembering and communicating and having fun with your understanding. So yeah, maybe use those 4 gems, apply it to what you saw about patterns and how when you see patterns in reading, it makes it more enjoyable and makes you able to do it better. Use those gems to give birth to a question, to allow you to have a question about these patterns and how they function. Was the study philosophy or psychology? What was it?
What?
While I was studying comparative philosophy at night, I was working at a rehab center during the day. Wow. Comparative philosophy at night. This experience provided the basis for some of the articles I wrote on the application of dialectic as a mode of psychotherapy in the treatment of alcoholics. Ooh, like a game. When they release it, they have the definition and demonstration inside their own company. But when the game is released, the game always has bugs. Why? Because it did not have the division yet. Ooh, interesting. Nice. You're taking your seeing with you. Notice as we level up, we'll start to see things that we only dimly perceived, just like in a game. As you level up, I always think of the thief class. As he levels up his ability to be a thief, he'll start to recognize traps and hidden treasures that were there but only dimly perceived. It affects the way you see the world. Skaters call it skater eye. If you keep practicing and loving and being curious about skateboarding and demonstrating it too, you start to see the world as a giant skate park. You start to see through your understanding, see through your questions, your puzzles, your wonder. As a result of these articles, I was hired as a psychologist at another rehab center. As I reflected on the direction I was taking, I realized that in reviving, oh, what's he doing? Reawakening. It's the name of the channel. I was reviving and adapting. So he's adapting. So he's adding to the tradition as well. A Socratic. So I like to say we read Socrates, not Plato, when we read the Platonic dialogues. And there's good reason for that. Adapting a Socratic philosophical midwifery. It was necessary to study the art of dialogue. There's our word art. What kind of an art are we in? Dialogue. In depth, because that was the vehicle through which man has been studied in the classical age. The vehicle studied in the classical age. What's being studied? Man. We are curious about the nature of man. Surely in therapy there was a kind of dialogue, but it lacked the method of philosophers. In doing this midwifery and discussing it with others, what do we just say? It's not a one-person game. Share your insights, share your highs and lows, share your puzzles, share your wonder. Discuss it with others. Have coffee. Cheers. I realized I was placing the emphasis on the mastery of Platonic dialogue. Here we go. And dialectic, rather than that of the European philosophy. So what have we got? What it is and what it ain't. It ain't European philosophy. It ain't the moderns. What most philosophy colleges spend their time doing. This was curious because most of my colleges relegated, so what did I just say? Funny. Relegated Platonic tradition. So most, let's keep this green for what it ain't. Colleges relegated the Platonic tradition to something quaint and only of historic interest, right? Normally when you go and study philosophy, that's, oh, Plato, yeah, he was it's quaint. like talking about a toddler. Oh yeah, he had these forms. We know much more now. What a quaint historical interest we have in Plato with his forms. Abstractions, we know there's no such thing as forms. He didn't even have modern science. Right? They believe the hallmark of philosophical naivete was to consider Plato's thought an ideal to strive for. Right? You are so philosophically naive to strive for Plato. Wasn't he before Hegel and Kant? Therefore, evolution says the later ones are the better ones. You're so naive. We know much more than Plato does. That's what the logos ain't. We're reawakening. We're going back and actually realizing that we dropped the ball. Any attempt to adapt it to psychotherapy, or so what's he doing? He's adapting Plato's thought to psychotherapy, or to expect that it might rival other spiritual traditions. Let's use a different color. So what's he doing? He's adapting Plato's thought to psychotherapy and saying it rivals the other spiritual traditions, just as Socrates himself said in that quote we just looked at, many other staff bearers. Right, I'm ending the stream now anyway. Was considered absurd. So, good place to end it on. We are seeing more about how to use the dialectic, the importance of sharing it with our friends, the importance of encouraging ourselves to use our own words, to reflect on whether or not the words are true or not. Don't just believe them because you're used to believing them, but also how they can awaken kind of koan, our natural koans. We're naturally curious about our own puzzles, our own problems, and our own excellence, our own highest goals. So, and we can recognize that the Platonic tradition rivals, or maybe the whole of the spiritual tradition, of spirituality. And the other ones that we run into, the Socrates, Pierre Grimes ran into various different high-ranking gurus in these different traditions and recognized, oh, these are just aspects of some kind of whole. And by the way, I saw the whole. That was where I started at St. John's College. In the 100-book series, the first books were in the Hellenic tradition. That was the whole. And everything since then was a diminishing. So, and then, we saw Campbell and maybe even Alan Watts. We didn't say much about Alan Watts, but we saw Campbell and Jung as in that European Christian tradition, dropping the ball. But good for us. We can pick it up. We can learn the logos. We don't have to believe. We don't have to be given a guru, a koan from a guru. We don't have to shave our head and wear funny robes. We don't have to get a degree and pay money and give the right answers on the exam to repeat Carl Jung's work or whatever. We can do it ourselves. We can discover the logos for ourselves. It is the self logos. We're naturally curious about it. And here we are seeing someone demonstrating all of those things we are just defining. He did it. He lived it. He met the people. He was Forrest Gump or Luffy, but for spirituality. So that's really cool. So we're seeing how it came to be and also gaining an understanding of the whole by seeing his encounter with the various different parts within the academic tradition and within the Eastern spiritual traditions. Oh, and within other Western spiritual traditions like Mr. L. Ron Hubbard as a kind of representation of what that is of nature. The nature of that kind of religious thinking in the West. So, really cool. Clearing up our seeing, and as we read this, we apply it, oh, that's in the category of what isn't. What if the logos wasn't true? What if there what is it called? The art of blah blah blah, art of dialogue, midwifery, and the dialectic, application of the dialectic. So the art of dialogue is the dialectic, which is the logos, the application or the structure of the logos. So yay. And he realizes, oh, I can adapt what Socrates was using it for to discover the truth, the understanding, and the direct apprehension. And then there's levels in Socrates beyond the experience, the integration of that experience, and there's other levels beyond that too. So applying it to not the excellence, but adapting it to solving problems. So he was really, what did he say? A mode of psychotherapy, but not actually psychotherapy, because we could say psychotherapy could be highlighting a kind of aspect. Just as Jung might have had some success with the dialectic, but didn't understand it, didn't talk about it, didn't communicate it well, so it couldn't be understood. So whatever success, it was kind of, I don't know, haphazard, lucky. But he recognized the significance of the dialogue. So even within modern psychotherapy, the guy that's considered like one of the greats, Jung, even he was reaching out towards the thing that we are learning for ourselves and doing. We're defining it and demonstrating it. We did a few dialectics today. So, hooray for us. Very exciting. I hope that you're excited to keep reading with us. Feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube. You can follow along on Twitch. You can join the Discord where I give notifications when we go live. You can support on Patreon. And thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have gained a natural koan from today's podcast that you can take with you in your day. See how it goes. And hey, report back to us. What did it do for you? Thank you so much.